Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to join you, and greetings from, for once in a while, a sunny summer's day in England. It's a beautiful morning and the sun's shining, so it's obviously good news for your conference as well. But it's great to have the opportunity to share with you a few thoughts on a really important question. For universities, innovation is at the heart of what we do. Let me define innovation very simply. For me, and I've spent a long time looking at it, it really comes down to something very simple. Innovation's creating value from ideas. Now, the value could be business value, commercial value, we're familiar with that. It can also be social value. And indeed, a great deal of my own research work these days is looking at the humanitarian sector, where we need lots of innovation and where universities and the ideas that come through them are a key part of that story. But innovation is creating value from ideas. Now, we're not stupid. We do understand innovation as a process isn't simple. It's not like that light bulb moment in the cartoons. You know, the kind of thing, bing, the light bulb flashes, and there we have it. We understand there's more to it. It's a process of transforming great ideas into something that actually works and contributes value. And this question of managing that process becomes central to what universities are doing these days, not least because increasingly we're measured on it. The word impact is in my title there, partly because it's a very important theme these days in university life, right around Europe and elsewhere. And it's coming through not least in terms of the ways our universities are measured and funded. We've for some time in Europe been measuring research and how well universities perform at that. And the easy part is to count the ideas, to count the scientific publications in quality journals. That is a measure, a proxy measure of ideas. So too are the patents we file. We can count those, but they don't happen by accident. They happen through an environment which supports research and its translation to impact. So increasingly, the measurement systems for universities have looked at the context, the environment for research. But most recently, the big theme has been impact. Do those ideas, even if they get published, do those ideas actually create value, social value, business value? And this isn't a trivial question. In the UK, for example, we still spend from public funds about £1 billion every year funding research at universities. Now, on that basis, it's not unreasonable for the Treasury to ask, do we get what the Americans would call the bang for the buck, or we might in England say the performance for the pound? In other words, do we get the impact from that significant investment in research? And what's happening with universities now is they're increasingly required to demonstrate that. And we're measured not just on the publications we make and all the other traditional measures, but also on what are called impact case studies, demonstrable, time-based studies which show whether or not things have impact. So this is a central question, and it really speaks to how does the innovation process operate and how do we relate to the world outside? Now, this is a picture of a couple of books. The first one in the center, Wealth from Knowledge, was actually published in 1972. The second one is one that I contributed to, was published in 2012. So there's 40 years between them, but the same underlying theme. And it's this theme of how do we get value from ideas? And it's really studying the way in which the innovation system works, and particularly the roles which universities can and do play within it. And the underlying question for both books is, can we learn from this? Can we acquire best practices? And if I speak to the second book, Creating Wealth from Knowledge, it's something I had a great personal involvement with. I was at Imperial College in London, heading up a 5-university program. It involved about 35 researchers. We had some very bright people from Cambridge, from Cranfield, from Liverpool, from various places coming together to study the question of how, in the UK, do we increase and enhance the impact from investments in R&D. And we were looking not just at universities, but at their wider systems, the organizations they deal with, and how well knowledge flowed across that boundary. And we came to a number of conclusions, just a couple of headlines. The first is that the kind of Silicon Valley model, which was very popular in 2012 when we were looking at this, the Silicon Valley model, which is what we need is lots more spin-outs. Well, yes, there's no doubt spin-outs are very important. And those wonderful ideas that take place in a university lab and then spread out wider, that's an important challenge. But relatively, it's a very small part of the ways in which universities have impact. By far the biggest way in which universities have impact is at the heart of what we do. It's through creating trained people. We provide people with knowledge at universities, they carry that out into the wider world, and through that we have impact. And we shouldn't forget that innovation, ideas, knowledge happens through a process of people movement more than anything else. But what we also found looking at this research was a great variety of mechanisms for looking at and managing the process of innovation between the ideas at the university and then finding impact in the wider world. So this innovation process takes place along a broad frontier. And that was very timely because, of course, at this time, what we were really seeing was the impact of open innovation on thinking about ways in which innovation could be managed in companies, in universities, in the way that government approached the policy framework within which this happens. Now, let's just remind ourselves, we like to think innovation happens something like this. There are ideas, but there's a structured process which we can't guarantee success, but hopefully leads to success. And I'm very comfortable with this model. I should be. It's at the basis of my textbook. It's at the basis of the courses I teach, but so do hundreds of other professors teaching courses. And indeed, so does the whole consulting industry, the McKinseys and Bostons of the world. And it's basically now at the heart of the international standard for innovation management. It's not just a random light bulb moment. We need a process. So that's fine. And we understand a lot about the process, except we should recognize that innovation doesn't actually happen like this. It happens like this. Now, don't worry if you can't see the detail. That's quite deliberate. What I would like you to see is spaghetti, because that's what innovation really is. Knowledge spaghetti. It's technical knowledge and market knowledge, legal knowledge, financial knowledge, all sorts of strands of knowledge held by many different people all over inside and outside organizations. Our job in innovation, if we want to create value, is to weave those strands of knowledge together in some way that does deliver impact. That's what we do. We can superimpose on that some structure. That's fine. We can put our university knowledge transfer system or our company innovation process. We can do that, but we shouldn't forget what's going on underneath is knowledge spaghetti. And this, of course, is the challenge which open innovation really surfaced when Henry Chesbrough published his book in 2003. It's not a new idea. He didn't invent that. It's something we talked about in innovation studies for 50 years before that. But what we do understand is that innovation is a distributed process of managing knowledge spaghetti. And what we've learned is, first of all, it's a multiplayer game. Not all the smart people work for us. Even if we might have in the university people generating ideas, the absorption of those ideas and the application has to involve players on the other side. It's a multiplayer game. And the key to it really is it's not just creation. It's not that old-fashioned model we sometimes had in universities of being great at knowledge and we put it into the books and put those on the shelves and we own this, we're the guardians of this knowledge base. No. The key to open innovation is knowledge flow, moving that knowledge around in different ways, making that boundary very permeable. That's what's really going on in open innovation, whether we're talking about R&D departments in companies or research units within universities. It's all therefore about connection, ways of fostering connection and interaction, not just one way, but interactive connections inside organizations as well as outside. Not just universities having little silos of knowledge, but even inside those universities having the possibility to share. And we know there's a great deal of what Andrew Hargadon at University of Southern California calls recombinant innovation. Sometimes ideas that are quite well understood in one zone actually have real relevance in another. And part of this story is taking ideas from one world and moving them across somewhere else. So we're getting this idea of what he calls recombinant innovation. But the big question which has preoccupied us, which was at the center of our research back in the 2012 book, but continues to be an important question, is how? How do we make this happen? What's the role of brokers? How might we construct bridges? Who are the gatekeepers? What happens with platforms these days? These are all big and not fully understood, but big questions around the how of making innovation happen, having impact with our ideas. So what we're really talking about here is a kind of version. We talk a lot these days the language of business model innovation. What we're really needing is to think about innovation model innovation. How does innovation happen? How is that changing? How is that reflected in the ways we operationalize it? And what we really need are evolving models that match the complexity, the richness of today's innovation context. It's not the same as it was in the 1960s. It's radically different, many, many more opportunities, not least those offered by the internet and more recently by machine learning and AI. So we need evolving models that match that complexity. And perhaps a little bit of autobiography. I was very fortunate in my early career to study with a professor called Roy Rothwell. He worked at the Science Policy Research Unit at Sussex University, and he and they were pioneers in understanding this field of innovation management. And Roy was one of the architects of the very famous Project Sappho studies from the 1970s, which laid the foundations for today's ISO. A systematic way in which businesses and other players like universities can work in the innovation process. But Roy wrote a very significant paper in 1992, and it was looking back and looking forward at the models, the evolving models of the innovation process. And what he basically argued was the early days, the 1960s, were characterized by really simplistic models. The classic one, which I have to say, still universities are prone to fall back to, is the simple knowledge push model. All we have to do is create the knowledge and it will somehow find its way out there. Not necessarily the best model, but of course what it implies is you pump lots of resource in the front end to fill up that knowledge tank and hope it flows. The other simplistic model, of course, is the reverse of that, the demand pull. Necessity is the mother of invention, so let that demand pull it through. Now, of course, what we began to realize is we need both. We need a coupling between push and pull, and that speaks to how innovation actually happens in many, many documented examples. So we began to get a third generation model, which was about coupling. And when Roy was writing, it was really what we might have called, what he would have called, a fourth generation, recognizing it was about a multiplayer game. It wasn't just the firm at the center, it was connections with key suppliers, including universities, particularly for those knowledge resources, and with key customers, with government and others, beginning to have a more systemic view. But the key to the paper for me was what he foresaw into the future. Now, this was a time when we didn't have an internet, where we had very, very early digital examples of innovation, where we were still very much in a rather simplistic and, dare I say, a rather regional view of innovation, not a global one. And what he foresaw was a global, networked, interactive system, digitally enabled. So it was a real vision, and he began to sort of talk about the kinds of approach we'd need to work with that fifth generation. I think we're now in that world. I'm still look back to his paper and think how prescient he was, but we need to take advantage of that model. And that certainly speaks against simplistic linear models and towards much more interactive open models. And we're seeing this. The good news is that if you look at the language, and the language I'm sure you've been using this morning around innovation and how universities can play a role in this, we talk about ecosystems linked, mutually dependent. We've got the triple helix, we have the quadruple helix. I've even read a paper last year from Brazil about a quintuple helix. So the idea that innovation is a partnership, a relationship between universities, various kinds of consumers, companies, not-for-profits and so on, government and others. There are many things going on. And what we're really doing now, I think, and what your conference this morning is about, is learning to manage these new models. So let me just draw some of that into focus with 3 short stories, just to give it frame. And the first of those pictures, that rather nice sort of abstract graphic on the left, it's something that in the UK is one of the most successful pieces of innovation policy that we've had. A measure of that is it still persists. As you well know, I'm sure most governments like to change policy every couple of years, especially when you have shifting governments. This is a policy that survived those waves. It's coming up for its 55th birthday. It's been around for 55 years and it still works. It's extremely popular with business and with other users. And it's a really simple model for connecting universities with the wider world. It's called a knowledge transfer partnership, and you can find out more if you're interested, but the predicate is really simple. It says knowledge moves through people. So if we have on the demand side, businesses that want knowledge from universities, and on the supply side, universities that have it, let's build a human bridge. And it's a very simple model. The government subsidizes, doesn't pay all the costs, but subsidizes some of the costs to place a graduate in a company or a not-for-profit, a user organization, to carry out a specific project, moving a specific chunk of knowledge from the university into practice, but over a period of 2 to 3 years. And of course, what happens there is that the bridge begins as a very simple track and gradually over time gets strengthened. The relationship grows, the traffic moves two-way. By the end of it, what's really been built isn't one successful project having impact, but a relationship which persists. And that model, simple though it sounds, is enormously popular, enormously effective. Knowledge does have impact in those user organizations, but much more important is that it builds relationships across these boundaries. It's a very simple version of what Rothwell would have predicted. My second example, the Friedrich Alexander Universität, which is the main university in the southern state of Bavaria, in the town of Nuremberg, or 2 towns of Nuremberg and Erlangen. It was founded, as you can see, in 1743. So it's coming up for its 300th birthday party. It's extremely successful. As you might expect, it's successful not just because it survived. It was last week voted the most innovative university in Europe, and it's in the top in the world, and not for nothing. This is not just about the papers it publishes. This is about a university that really connects its knowledge and makes innovation happen. And I have been involved for some time with helping them think through their strategy. And what we basically came up with was a very simple concept: knowledge in motion. This is the reverse of the static, let's create and own knowledge, let's keep it flowing. And let's let it flow in many directions, and let's enable that. And that's something the university has already been doing. What we were really doing was putting a label to it. And what you have there is a university which, of course, has a flow of smart people who are educated and become knowledge carriers. You have very close relationships, particularly with the local industries, who don't just sit and consume ideas, but are actively feeding them back. They sit on the board of the university. This is, for example, the center of what's called Medical Valley in Germany, where Siemens and many other of the healthcare technology companies have their base, because it's right next to the university from whom they get many of their ideas, including the very early X-ray technology that helped Siemens get started. But it isn't just Siemens, it's Bosch and it's Schaeffler. Right across the spectrum, what you have is knowledge in motion and a vision which says, that is what we do. We are a part, we're not an ivory tower, we are a connected part of a system, putting knowledge in motion, moving it to and from the users where we can all create impact. And my last example is a very personal one. One of my very first jobs as a postdoctoral researcher was helping to sell, I'll put that carefully in inverted commas, microelectronic solutions. This was at the time in the 1980s of the microelectronics revolution, where we could put intelligence on a chip and apply that, particularly in control systems, to any kind of problem. I was a young chemical engineer. And my job was to act as the technical salesperson. I'd visit all sorts of companies, see their problems in terms of control of temperature, pressure, movement, all sorts of control loops, and convert that to questions my electronics engineering team could solve using the new technology. So a classic way in which universities could take their ideas out. The lesson I learned was that there were two different worlds, that essentially I was speaking to an industrial world of users who were very suspicious at that time of universities, particularly of a technology that came out of this lovely environment with green fields and labs with people in white coats. I vividly remember a man in the Midlands who ran a foundry, and in the Midlands they're well known for speaking bluntly. And he basically said, I'll translate in a moment. He said, "No, you've got to understand, John, if you can't hit it with a hammer, it's not right for our industry." What he meant, of course, was not literally, if you can't hit this technology with a hammer, we don't want it. But he was very suspicious of what might come out of the university world to his very different world. And my job was essentially not translating technical requirements. That was a small part of it. It was translating, bridging between the worlds. I was an example of knowledge flowing across people. Now, reflecting for this talk, I came across one of my heroes in innovation studies, Everett Rogers. And Everett Rogers spent his entire life as a research professor looking at why do people adopt new ideas? Why do things move? Why are things taken up and then have impact? And his studies covered all sorts of technologies, all sorts of sectors. They came down to the same themes. And apart from everything else, it's a social process. We trust people like us. We trust ideas that seem to come from a world we're familiar with. What it implies, of course, is we need bridges. Whether it's somebody like me selling microchips or the very famous woman Brownie Wise, who pioneered the spread of Tupperware as an innovation. Now, Tupperware, I'm sure you're familiar with the plastic storage boxes. It was a brilliant technical product. Earl Tupper was a great chemical engineer. He synthesized this plastic from oil waste. So he was almost an alchemist, turning waste into gold. Trouble was, nobody wanted to buy it. And the Tupperware party evolved as a mechanism for taking the great idea, proving it to people, housewives, in the context where they were comfortable, and being demonstrated to by people like them, other housewives. And Brownie Wise effectively was the woman who pioneered this and built a whole team of housewives to become the social marketing system which made that happen. In my technical terms, I'd call her a conveyor. She moved the ideas to where they could have impact. Not created the ideas, but became part of that system to moving it. Now, those are three stories. I could tell many more, but for me, they illustrate the point I'm really trying to make today. It's a system view along a broad frontier, and it's all about enabling knowledge flow in both directions. So let me summarize very briefly. The problem of innovation never changes. How do we create value from ideas? But the context does change. And we have a wonderfully rich context right now. We've got global opportunities, global connections, hugely digitally based, and now with AI coming onto the horizon as a yet another part of that context. In the face of that, we've got to rethink our approaches. We can't have one model that works forever. It's a system level challenge, and we need, wherever we sit in that system, and especially in universities, to rethink our approaches. Even if things work, they can always work better. We need this idea of what I say is innovation model innovation. And that moving target, that constantly changing context, requires what innovation students like myself call dynamic capability. Now, that's the capability not just to set up a system, a way of making innovation happen, but also the meta capability to step back and tune it, revise it, turn it up, turn it down, occasionally replace it with a new model. Dynamic capability. And I'd like perhaps to leave you with that as a key challenge. And as a teacher, I realize it's always helpful to reinforce my message from a different direction. So I'm now going to finish, if I may, Shanta, with 2 minutes and one very short song to put this word and a tune into your heads to reflect on in thinking about this challenge of creating impact from ideas. So briefly, I'll get my guitar and we'll just have a little sing. So if you do feel inclined, do sing along to the chorus, but here we go. You like to think you're sitting on top of your technology. Your gadgets are smart and cool because you do lots of R&D. Your software's fast and your data's the best. Your packaging's great, you can't ignore all the rest. There's only one problem left at your door. Folks don't want your product no more. So you need dynamic capability. In innovation, it's got to be dynamic capability at the heart of your philosophy. You can't rely on the old routine to deal with problems you've never seen. In innovation, the key to creation. Keep on building up your dynamic capability. Dynamic capability. Dynamic capability. Now, I guarantee, if nothing else, that song will stay with you all day and you'll curse me for it. But I hope you can also take the message. It's about connections, making those connections and rethinking them and remaking them. And in the spirit of that, if you liked any of the things I've said or you'd like to know more about them, please subscribe. It's all free, but please connect with me. There's my address and how you can find me. But Shanta, thank you very much, and back to you.